What's
the
up,
regular button.
Elliot? Hello,
How we
Mateo.
doing?
How you doing?
I'm good. Good to
How's
see you
everyone
today,
doing?
Pete. Matteo. I love that. I think that would be my preferred name. I wish I was born in Italy, actually.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I think about when I think about Mr. Matt Cameron. I think you and Fabio. Sorry, Elliot, we're like interrupting you. Go for it.
No, it's all good. I love the camaraderie. Okay, to get us started, we're here for a fireside chat with Matt Cameron. Love that there's already some back and forth. Do you want to start us off with a quick icebreaker? Given that it is like cold and flu season, I know some of us are feeling it. Pete, do you guys have like any at-home remedies to take care of yourselves?
Yeah, so I'm working from home right now because I have like a pretty amazing cough that my colleagues were like, get the fuck out of here. I think my probably at home remedy would be like don't have a kid, right? Because like all my 5-year-old is like he was the virus donor to me. So that would be like my recommendation there would be like, keep the kids away from you. It's going to be the thing.
I was told at a young age that a good tea made of fresh ginger, lemon, and honey was the way to go. But I've been with my wife for 8 years now, and she was born in Costa Rica and tells me, no, the answer is 2 shots of tequila. So I'm prepared to try both.
Obviously.
That's it. Mm-hmm.
Obviously.
Yeah.
What's your favorite, Elliot?
Well, my favorite obviously has to be tequila. Mexican grandmother. They always recommend it. I do have an old girlfriend of mine used to recommend Polish background to crush up like garlic cloves,
Oh
like
God.
3 or 4 of them, and just put a little bit of honey over it. Just eat a spoonful of that. Tried it when I had a flu. Did not go over well. I do not recommend it at all.
Nice head fake. You're like, oh, it's a big no. It's terrible. It sounded yeah.
It's the worst. No. It made me feel worse. Okay,
Love
so
it.
I do see that we have a few more people in attendance, so do want to get us started. Today we are here for a fireside chat with Matt Cameron. Super excited about the amazing content and takeaways everyone's going to be getting out of this event. Today's event is brought to you by the team over here at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, and sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka these are our modern sales pros. So our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer any questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners that they may not know about. We do that through live sessions like this, in online forum, and our quarterly summits. If you're already not a part of MSP, you're going to be invited to join after this event. And if you do like this content, you liked our events, we did host a 3-day RevX Fest in
It was
October.
so fun.
Pulled together, it was
It was
fantastic.
it
Pulled
was
together about
badass.
24 events of amazing contents and speakers. You'll be listening to the CEO of Gainsight, Outreach, HighSpot, and like dozens of other speakers like them. Going to be dropping the
Mhm.
link to those recordings in the chat. Give me 1 second, guys.
It was so good. We'll have to get you on the next one, Matt.
Looking
No,
forward to it.
it was
They're
amazing.
looking fun. I've
Full
got
of
FOMO. Yeah, great crew.
So like before we dive in almost into the content, we're going to go over some housekeeping notes. First of all, this event is being recorded. You'll be able to access this recording and key takeaways on the previous events page of the MSP website. Second, if there's any questions for our panelists, please do use the Q&A function, and we'll be sure to get to them during the event. Okay, I'm going to pass it off to you, Pete. Talk about Atrium and introduce yourself, and Matt, I'm going to hop backstage.
All right. Thank you, Elliot. Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. For folks who don't know, Atrium makes data-driven sales management software. So it's software that helps sales managers, leaders, and reps use metrics to improve the performance of their teams, to measure, manage, improve, all those good things, right? Then one of the coolest things about Atrium is it takes about 5 minutes to set up a free account. You just sign in and connect, set up a read-only connection to your Salesforce CRM, and presto changeo, you have a world-class metrics harness that's being monitored to let you know what's happening with all your reps across hundreds of metrics. So that's a little bit on us. I am super pumped. Oh man, look at that whippersnapper there. We need a new headshot, Matt.
Oh, come on
Um,
now. Come on now.
come on now, come on now. We
The
need the
glasses.
we
The
get
glasses.
the,
Huh?
the TikTok filter. Yeah, me too. I have like 50% less hair than in that picture. So a couple of introductions here today. I'm super pumped because I've always been just an astronomical fan of Matt's, mainly because he's like the sales nerd, for sure. And I'm excited to talk about all manner of sales training, sales management, leadership, and other various sundry topics with Matt today. So um, I'll just introduce myself really quickly. I am the founder of Atrium, but also prior to Atrium, I started a software company called TalentBin. It was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And that's kind of where I went from being like a business generalist founder to being our first sales rep, our first sales manager, our first sales leader. And that's really kind of like where I learned like modern sales, right? Like, oh, okay, like operationally excellent, analytically excellent, go to market. And so after TalentBin was acquired by Monster Worldwide, I wrote a book on startup sales called Founding Sales, and then I started Modern Sales Pros as well. So that's a little bit on me. Matt, maybe you can kind of give folks a little bit of a rundown, because like, I mean, I'm sure everyone is familiar with you because like everybody knows SaaSy Sales Leadership, right? And SaaSy Sales Management, because it's so sassy and it's such a great it's such a great program for frontline managers to like learn about how to be a manager, which is important and not really taught. And also the same with leaders as well. But I don't think people are as familiar with like the things that you did before, even like all the way back in the day as well. So maybe you can just like kind of take us through all the various some of those roles that you've had, because I think it'll inform some of our conversation as we continue.
Yeah, happy to do so. And I'm so excited to be here and share, because I think some of my background is non-traditional for SaaS, and maybe to help folks think about alternative directions and career options for themselves going forward. But I started out not in sales, actually. And I don't think even you know this, Pete, but in 1990, I was studying computer engineering. Old. And so I was studying
this is not surprising to me.
Yeah. And I was part-time working at IBM to pay for my university. And my boss came over to me one day and he said, as I was trying to fix 5 1/4-inch floppy drives in a device, he said, "You know what, Matt?" He said, "You're not a very good technician and you talk a lot. You should go do marketing." This is verbatim. And it was the best career advice I ever had. It hurt a little bit at the time. And so after 2 years of computer engineering, I went to university, did marketing and management, and ended up combining the two to get a full-time, they called it internship with Hewlett Packard for a year, where I was working in marketing for HP. Perfect combination, marketing plus engineering. Now, there's a lesson in this that's going to be a theme, I think, for our chat, Pete, and that is, why did I get that job? I was uniquely positioned to doing it because every other applicant was a marketer, and I was a computer engineer, albeit failed, who also happened to know a little bit about marketing. So I had really deep domain knowledge about what we were selling. So that's how I started. And then from there, I'll accelerate it. I basically worked through the channel. I worked for a distributor, a reseller, a VAR, an ISV, for those independent software vendor, so that I was representing all those solutions, and ultimately ended up working for a company called Electronic Data Systems in 1999, which became Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And what they did was pretty much anything, but their big thing was around business process outsourcing. So rather than saying, we're going to sell you a bunch of hardware and software, they would say, we're going to provide you computing services at your desk. And what does that mean? Everything up to where you plug it into the wall, because back in the day, you didn't have Wi-Fi. We will just make sure that when Pete needs a laptop, it turns up on, or PC back then, it would turn up on his desk. It would work. It would have software in it. And if he couldn't use it or it was broken, you could ring us and we'll fix it. And today that's costing you $10 million a year to service your staff. And we're going to do it for $8 million a year.
Wow. Big, that's not a small deal.
Sure, exactly. And so that was what I did at EDS. And then I went on after that to do some consulting. But I'll pause there for a second and say this, because I think it was pivotal for our conversation. You know, Pete, that I'm big on understanding the domain into which you're selling. And when I was there, I decided to go after logistics supply chain,
Mm,
and my primary buyer was a CFO. Because
okay.
we would go and say, you've got an SAP practice. Most of you all have heard of SAP, Enterprise Resource Planning System, and you've got 150 people managing this instance for your company. But guess
Yep.
what? We've got 5,000 of those experts, and we can employ all your people and deliver you back your service cheaper. But my buyer was not the CIO, the CTO, because we were taking away their empire.
Yeah, they were not happy about that.
My buyer is the CFO or the
Mm,
COO. And so I was like, well, hang on, I'm a 27-year-old, right? How the hell am I going to do that? And so what I did is I actually went and did a 2-year part-time postgrad in finance.
mm,
Why? Because then I could have a sensible conversation with the CFO. I could talk balance sheets. I could talk operating and income statements, right? And I understood the concept of a hurdle rate, investment criteria, those sorts of things.
yep.
Most technology people who come in wouldn't understand. I like to say this: they wouldn't know the IRR from the ARRSE, right? So that's how I started, and I took that philosophy with me through the rest of my career. Where I ended up consulting for 5 years in sales because, like you, I'm a sales nerd and did B2B sales process consulting, which is when I met Salesforce in 2005. And the way I met them was they'd implemented in a telco that I was part-time managing the B2B sales org as a consultant, and it was terrible. And so I told them I was going to throw it out, and 3 months later, I ended up working for them.
So the customer success leader for the APAC region or Australia, New Zealand parachuted in and was like, "No, Matt, don't do it." Nice. I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah. And then I think subsequent to that, so you worked at, you also did APAC stuff for Yammer, if I recall correctly, and
That's
then
right.
led sales at a couple of high growth SaaS startups as well. Is that right?
That's right. And Yammer was an interesting one. So Yammer, they employed me to do APAC, but then they actually brought me to the States to run half their sales organization, which was the commercial sales org. We were split enterprise and the rest. And I got the
Velocity
rest.
one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. I'd never done that before. So our segment was up to 2,500 employees. So that was fun.
Uh-huh.
The SDR org, the AE org, everything up to that. And then, of course, we got acquired by Microsoft about 12 months after that. And then subsequently, I went back to my roots. I like building things. So I did 2 Series A to Series B companies subsequently, and then founded SaaSy in 2016.
I love it. It's so fantastic. And one of the things, aside from having known Matt for going on more than a decade now, the one of the big things I've always been a fan of is at Atrium we talk about how sales management is so important, and of course the way that we approach it is say that like managers should be able to manage by metric, right? SDR managers, AE managers, what have you. And so you can do that with software, and that's, you know, we have lots of fancy engineers and we've invested lots of time and energy into making software that does that. But the actual management has to be done by a human, right? Like robot can't do the management. And so the level of investment, the level of like training that most managers get is like not nearly where it needs to be, which is why I'm always been such a big fan of SaaSy there, and we refer people to it. For folks who are interested, who are attending right now, if you'd like to get we have an offer here. If you'd like to get a copy of a Coffee is for Coaches Yeti mug, and then one of my favorite sales books right now is The Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon. It's pretty fantastic. I mean, it's like wide ranging. It's kind of like a survey of a bunch of different stuff. I mean, it's like John McMahon, right? Like the CRO of Parametric Technology Corporation, Blade Logic. He's on the board at Snowflake. Like, you know, you probably heard of him. He's kind of a big deal. The book is super fun from a read standpoint because it's just, you know, it's written as a narrative and it's a lot of like anecdotes and what have you. You kind of feel like you're riding along with John as these like, you know, like unscrewing a bunch of these sales organizations. So we're going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat here. And you can sign up for that if you'd like. So Matt, we have a number of topics that kind of cover here that I'm excited about, but I think one of the big things that, and I think you're seeing this kind of in the market right now, where there's been a lot of organizations that historically have like tried to acquire a bunch of different companies, and under the hypothesis that like, like, I don't know, use Twilio. Like Twilio, we're gonna buy Segment and we're gonna like cross-sell it to everybody, right? Like we're just gonna add more things to the bag, and then like these guys will just like magically sell more of it, right? That's how it works. And I think it's like actually not how it works, unfortunately. And so then you end up with like a bunch of overlays and so on and so forth. But point is that like sales training is like a lot harder than people kind of give credit to, especially like, both from a ramp standpoint, from a, new personas, from selling in a new segment standpoint. What is kind of like keeping sales training from working the way we would like it to work?
I think there's a couple of things. First is that, to your point, we're too diffuse. So if you take the Twilio example, someone else, and I don't have any insight to them at all, but if you take an example where you've got a potentially matrixed organization, multiple product lines, and to your point, overlays and sales specialists, as an individual contributor that may own an account, it's very hard to know where to focus your time and energy. And when you've got everybody coming at you consistently with training, it's overwhelming. And so, the first thing I would say is this: if I was an IC listening to this conversation now, what I would do is I would make a success plan for myself. And this may not be popular with the organization, but it's basically, where am I placing my bets in terms of the products and services that I'm going to double down on to make sure I'm competent to sell and represent to my territory and really good at it? Because I would rather do that than try to be all things to all people and skim off the top of the waves. The second thing is, in terms of why does training not work? Because we're still episodic with our training, meaning that we do things, in very intensely and then nothing more. And it will tend to fail.
SKO. Nothing. SKO. Nothing.
Yeah. Exactly. And professionals in enablement, I can see Paul Butterworth's on the call, which I'm very delighted to see. It's people like that really, they get this. And of course, there's a pre-SKO, there's SKO, and then there's the everboarding concept, right? You're never, not just on, but everboarding. We get that now. But where it falls apart still is the people that own the keys to this are the frontline managers. And I think what we're doing, where we're doing a disservice to folks, is that we are not enabling the managers as coaches. We're assuming that because they were good reps, they can teach other reps how to do things. But if you ask any frontline manager, how's your calendar looking? It's back to back, right? And they're not making the time to have intentional conversations about skills development with folks and reinforcing the learning. And the reality is, you know this, Pete, if you talk to someone about what they're training on or how they're inspecting deals, they're reverting back to what they've always known and they do. You know, if you're part of John McMahon's team back in PTC days, you're a medic person.
Sure.
So you're going to go for that. And that's great. But if you've got a new methodology, I saw there's a new book out recently with the JOLT approach, which is really interesting. If you're trying to imbue that in people's experience and their cadence, it has to be a programmatic, ongoing conversation that's not driven by enablement, actually. There needs to be buy-in and connection to purpose for the frontline managers. And to my earlier point about the reps need to narrow their lens and say, okay, this is what I'm going to get really good at. And if we don't do that, then it just feels like busy work and background noise.
Yeah. I think another gentleman, another enablement professional I'm a big fan of is a gentleman named Robbie Halford, who runs, he used to run enablement at Malwarebytes and then at Heap Analytics, and now he's over at oh gosh, I hope I get it right, Sparrow, but it might be Canary. It's a bird. I know it's a bird, right? And he's got this term that he uses, random acts of enablement. And like, you don't want random acts of enablement. It's like the worst possible thing, right? Like what you want is consistent, programmatized, reinforced, etc. And we've been doing this. So like, we're a pretty small sales organization. We have like 10 account executives. We got 6 SDRs, and we don't have the luxury of a sales enablement professional. But that doesn't mean that we don't have things for us to work on. And the way that we kind of approach that is twofold. We do like thematic stuff. We have what we call an enablement hour at 4 to 5 p.m. on Mondays, right? It's like not really kind of like outside of selling hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have like a set of things that we're going to go through, right? And then like maybe what we'll do is like we'll have that program will have a program that's going to be deployed, like, maybe it's a new prospecting program, or maybe it's like how to get referrals out of folks. And so we'll deploy it there and then focus on it for maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, because sometimes depending on the level of complexity, like maybe a week is like too short. And because what you need is to like train on it, like deploy it, actually have people do the repetitions, like show me how to do the push-ups. Oh no, you're bending your elbow, you're doing it right. And like, do the repetitions, measure it, come back again the next week, do it some more, and then move on to whatever the next thing is. And so that's what we'll do from a organizational standpoint. And then of course for the individuals, this is one of the things that I think, like what we're describing right now around like everboarding and kind of like ongoing enablement, that's obviously really, really important. The even better version of that, or like the next kind of level, is kind of per rep enablement. And of course, like that historically has been like very difficult for organizations to do until you got to the point where you had like multiple enablement staff who are then like business partnered. So like we have this large Atrium customer called Grin, and their SDR, they're very forward thinking from a sales operations and enablement standpoint, and they actually have a enablement business partner program where like you have an SDR enablement person who then is liaised with 4 SDR managers. I think they have like, I don't know, like 10 SDR managers or something like that. And like what they're doing is they're kind of helping diagnose the reps and then doing the work with the managers to like focus on an individual rep and what they need. And so but like doing that's obviously like gold star right there, but they're a very large organization. So the way that we do that is the manager and the rep have like a focus area that they're working on. And again, it's not like random things. It's like, hey, look, we are to kind of use the sport metaphor again, like, hey, we're working on this very specific part of your golf swing. Like it's not any of this other stuff. It's like all we're doing is you're just keeping your arms straight, right? And we're going to do that for the next 4 weeks, and we're going to measure appropriately. And that's going to be different on a per rep basis. And so the good news is that now, and like with modern sales, like you can diagnose where the issue is. It's like, so rather than it being kind of like peanut butter spread across everyone, like everyone's going to keep their arms straight. It's like, well, these 4 folks over here, they don't have that problem. These 2 do, right? We're going to diagnose that and then we're going to work on it. And so that's how we approach it. Is like, one, we have like org level program stuff that is like recurrent on like every 2-week cadence. And then we have individual stuff where the manager is responsible for saying, hey, we're going to like use Atrium as an example. We're very focused on a part of our sales motion is turning on free accounts. And so sometimes like AEs struggle with like making the ask, like, all right, Matt, let's go ahead and turn on an Atrium account for you. Based on what you said, it would be great, right? Sometimes like, reps will shy away from that. You see that in the data and they're like, great, we're going to practice on that for you 2 right here, you 3 over here. We're going to practice on it, something else. So that's kind of,
so I want to pile onto that. I think what you're talking about is the next level, the next generation of what we need to be doing. So the way I'm thinking about it is, lower cost DNA sequencing allows us to do designer drugs, designer medication at the human level, right? That's a breakthrough,
sure,
right?
Right.
What Atrium does is it gives you the ability to basically diagnose at an individual level the behavioral that you can see, the activities that exhibit it, so you can prescribe a prescription at an individual level, right? So I think that's one thing. What I think the next layer on top of that actually is something that we're spending a lot of time on, which is you're saying that no one's making the ask. You can see that in the data, so we're going to role play and practice that. But what we are spending a lot of time thinking about is why are they not making the ask? And so the lens through which there are many lenses you could use, but the one we choose to use is emotional intelligence. So what we're doing is we're doing EQ assessments. We look at these 15 different competencies. And to your point, we'll find out that the person you're talking about has a lower sense of optimism right now, perhaps a little bit low self-regard and low assertiveness, right? So they're just feeling very uncomfortable. Now, as a manager, you can train, you can role play, you can do it, but then they step in the ring, as it were. They're on the call, and then it all comes back to them, all those feelings. So what we believe, the next layer of enablement that needs to happen is actually outside of the traditional field, which is going to be essentially EQ coaching, giving them exercises and activities such that my assertiveness, and here's the thing. So through family, I actually know quite a bit about autism, and what you find with folks who are autistic, depending where they're on the spectrum, they don't understand social cues, but they can mimic the correct response. And so whilst the interesting thing about EQ is we can develop it, but if I'm not yet at a point where I feel very assertive and self-confident, we can actually coach people to mimic that behavior and do what they need to do as they get there. Because I believe
it's like fake it till you make it, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And I don't see many organizations doing this. I think it is the next edge of where we're going to take this. And I think that combined with deep domain expertise is what really puts daylight between the also-rans and the people who are really elite at what they do.
Yeah, that's so funny because like one of the things that I've been obsessed with is this notion, what I call installing backbone, which I want to talk a little bit as relates to domain expertise, where we see this with our reps all the time, and also our CS staff, is like they get insanely good at data-driven sales management. Like they can, they're like amazing at Atrium. They can like hand somebody a sales organization, be like, great, figure out which reps are having which issues and why. And, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, 30 minutes later, they're like, all right, cool. Got the whole rundown here. But then you put them in the ring with a 50-something-year-old CRO or what have you, and they potentially still blanch. And so this is something that we have to, continually reiterating to our staff is like, you guys know so much, you have so much expertise, you work with hundreds of customers, and you just think about this stuff all day long. And that sales leader, like they've only worked at 4 organizations or 5 organizations or what have you. And like, honestly, like they don't think about like, data-driven sales management all day long. They think about like all sorts of other crap that they have to do as a sales leader. So like, you can help them. You have this expertise. And so, but like, I really like the notion of how can you fake it? I think actually one of my account executive talks about his game face, right? Like putting on, like, it's almost like a mask, right? And actually I know you're from New Zealand, right? And so like the notion of like getting excited, what is it? The haka, right?
Haka.
Like the haka ahead of a, ahead of a rugby game, or I guess the haka actually comes from, ahead of a battle, right? But it's essentially like putting on your face. So even if you don't feel right, like you can like, kick butt in this rugby game, at least you can like put on a face ahead of that. That's fascinating. How do you train on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. And so it comes from traditional EQ development. And I think what I get excited about we've done is we've got EQ certified former VPs of sales doing the coaching, right? So we're connecting the two disciplines. So what we do is, if you think about, to your point about getting game face, it is literally talking through and negating the internal objections you have to it. For example, tell me, if I was coaching, I'd be like, all right, you're going to fail at this call. It's going to go terribly. Tell me all the reasons it's going to go bad. I don't know this. I don't know that. They know more about me, blah, blah. We go through it. We feel it. We go through it. And what's really interesting is once you get through that and you've said it out loud and you experienced it, the volume drops in your mind. It comes down. And then we flip it around and we say, what if that was not true? What if that was not true? And we go through that, right? And then we play one more exercise, which is tell me all the things, all the reasons or ways in which this thought or this perspective serves you. Okay, now let's talk about the ways it doesn't serve you, right? And very quickly you go, you know what? Screw that thought. That is a shitty thought. I'm going to throw that away, right? And we can get there. Now, traditional sales management, we don't do that, right? We just role play the exercise. But to your point, I can sit here all day feeling very calm, having a chat to you. But I promise you, if we were having an interview right now and it was some person that I have never spoken to, but was super famous, who I haven't met in the past, I'm going to be a little bit more nervous and maybe I won't perform the same way. And that's why we need to actually get them in the mindset, have them feeling it. And my perspective on this came back years ago, being in sport. And what did I learned from the Australian Institute of Sport? I used to live in Australia. We used to do so much visualization, and we could literally feel in our body the physiological changes as we visualized doing the activity. And that's what we try to do with reps. You've got to visualize, you've got to feel it. Otherwise, it doesn't change.
I love. I notice Will Foley is here with us today, which is fantastic because Will is another amazing sales nerd. He runs revenue operations, and I think he might be still temping as the CRO over at Brazen. But yeah, worst case scenario, best case scenario, likely scenario planning. He's thinking about it probably from a finance standpoint and an operations standpoint, because I know Will, but same thing in a call, right? Like same thing in a call. I grew up, playing baseball, same thing for an at bat, right? Like I was a pitcher. So, how is this probably going to go down? What am I thinking about here? And this is something, man, if there's one thing that I could give folks as a tip, it's making sure that account executives are doing a good job in pre-call planning is extraordinarily important. And frequently what ends up happening is, because they do a poor job of calendar management, one of the things that we talk about at Atrium consistently is we say calendar is destiny. And so if you don't have 15 minutes blocked before your call, in order to do your pre-call planning, even if you have a recipe for pre-call planning, and I'm like a crazy documentarian, so like of course we have a checklist for our pre-call planning and what have you, but if you don't have the time to do it and you're just like walking off of one call into another, it's just like going to be right, like you're not setting yourself
it's all
up for
context.
success.
Let me throw a perspective on that. I think a lot of people do what you described. If they're good, they'll do the 15-minute pre-call plan. And I think that's probably fine in a velocity sales organization. But I'll push back if we're talking about, and perhaps you'll agree, a mid-market enterprise. I said, don't do that. Reserve the last hour of your day or the first hour of your day to prep for the calls. I mean, my personal preference is the day before, so that, because there'll be certain ones like, oh, you know what? I've got to do some research on this company, or I think I know someone who knows someone that could help me in advance of this call. So for those larger deals,
even more offset.
And more time, such that you might realize, heck, you know what? I know someone who used to work with Pete, and I need the time to speak to them before I have the call. So I just worry that people rush through this stuff too quickly, and they think that, volume and velocity is what it's all about. It's not, unless you're in a highly transactional business. As you fun thing, you and I have met many folks. They're very strong opinions, very successful people about certain things. One thing I'll say to everybody on the call, when you're listening to advice or perspectives, think about context, because I see so many people put out these platitudes or these things and say, this is the thing to do, but they never say in this specific context, because some things will be always true
because of XYZ. Yeah.
Exactly. You know what I mean? So we can't talk about sales best practice, because what is that? There are so many different sales contexts.
Yeah. So I want to get back to the domain expertise thing, because I think that is one mechanism. I think the EQ thing is really great. Like having sufficient domain expertise, of course, is necessary. It's not sufficient, unfortunately, because you could still be like extraordinarily expert, and then like, your head could still be full of like negative self-talk and blocking you. But the inverse also doesn't work, where like you have all the positive self-talk in the world, and you're like, have like zero compunction whatsoever, and then you open your mouth and like stupidity ensues. Like that's a different problem. Both situations are going to negatively impact your win rate, I would imagine. So the way that we solve the latter case is probably better domain expertise. And I wonder, what your recommendations would be, and where you've seen folks be very successful in getting more domain expert.
Yeah, I think there are two things. When we talk domain, it can be industry verticalization, and it can also be jobs to be done or problem solving. So I could be a person who decides, I just want to sell, financial back office solutions for the rest of my life. Or it could be, I don't mind what I'm selling, but I want to work in the healthcare industry in this specific space. I think either is fine. But if you ever look at folks who are, later in their 30s, early 40s, who've been extremely successful consistently over time, it's almost invariably because they've done that. They've picked a horse and they've ridden it, and they just get better and better. And not only is it because of the depth of their domain knowledge, but of course, it's your network. I mean, why do you think I established SaaSy Sales Leadership instead of Matt's Sales Leadership? I mean, most of what we do is applicable to any sales organization.
Yeah, but
I've narrowed it. Not only is it good branding, but of course, all the things I just talked about. So
Wait, you mean
Here's my,
this the Salesforce.com sales leadership diaspora has a tendency to cluster in SaaS? Weird.
I know, right? I know. They swap VC dollars each week too. No, let's not talk about that. But here's the thing. So my example was exactly my example. Did you spiral down then? I hope not. There you go. My perspective back in the day was logistics and finance, and so I doubled down on that. Look, I even went to London Business School for 1 week to do an executive course on mergers and acquisitions. Was I ever going to use? Yeah, right. Like I really tripled down on it so that if I was meeting with,
are you ever going to use it? Yeah, you use the shit out of it in rapport building with the CFO that you're talking about when there's some sort of transaction that happened. You're like, hey, what was your perspective on the the FTX Binance blow up right there?
100.
Whoa, now I'm talking to a peer.
That's it, 1,000%, Pete. You want to be able to establish yourself as a peer, and it's interesting. I'll come back to that book. I haven't read it yet fully, but this new one that Jolt. One of the things they talk about is limiting the options of the buyer, and one of the techniques they talk about, which we've all used, was look, if I was in your situation, I would do this. If I think back to my early days, I would ghost the opposition by saying, I've considered these 3 things you could do, and here's why I wouldn't do those without throwing. That's a bad idea. I would do this thing now. You can't do that unless you've got peer level credibility. Yep. You've got to have peer level credibility, like you just said. Otherwise, why would I listen to you? So I worry that folks who don't have that are going to say, Pete, if I were you, I would do that. I don't care what you would do. What do you know? You've got to have that credibility. And so, tactical, practical advice for people on the call. It's not mandatory, but if you want much less friction in your career and an easier path to success, pick some lanes and stick in them, because every year you're just layering on expertise, connections, context, and you're just going to get better. You can't help but get better, right? Yeah. And so from an enablement standpoint, something I think is non-obvious for folks, and I don't see this done enough. If you go work for SAP or Oracle or whatever else, they have courses, finance for non-financial managers, supply chain planning, blah, 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 operations research, which has, in theory, nothing to do directly with the product itself, but it has everything to do with how it's deployed and the personas that you're selling to.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. One of the ways that we've addressed this is I'm a huge nerd, and I'm a very book nerd, and big reader, less so now that I have a kid, but this is one of the things I try to instill in our organization is reading as a mechanism by which to drive that subject matter expertise. And so we actually have, it's funny, I'm not wearing anything with a fox on it right now. My marketing team is going to kill me. But Atrium's mascot is the fox, right? It's Kit the Fox. Oh, actually, okay, here. Oh man,
I was lucky.
I was going to get in trouble, right? But because obviously foxes are smart, Atrium makes you smart, blah, 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 blah. But then we have this internal program that's called Smart as a Fox. And what it is it's a list of books, of pre-approved books in different subject matters. And there's subject matter expertise. So there's a bunch of different sales management and leadership, sales management, and also sales operations, kind of analytics books out there. So there's cracking the sales management code is the Bible of data-driven sales management, or at least measuring sales performance. There's Michelle Vazana's Crushing Quota, which is more about taking that and humanizing it and putting it in actual management. There's a bunch of sales management books out there, Qualified Sales Leader, 5 Secrets to Sales Coach, Todd Capone's stuff. Whenever you get around to writing your book, it'll be in there as well. And then and so those are our subject matter books that we have. And then we have functional area books as well. So we have customer success books. So our CS team, because our CS team needs to work with AE managers, SDR managers, sales leaders, et cetera. So they need to, if they read the Qualified Sales Leader, right, or they read Cracking the Sales Management Code, then they can drop John McMahon's name, and then someone will be like, oh yeah, whoa, okay, cool. Like,
Yeah.
like PTC. All right, great. And then they'll also read books on customer success as well. So the big thing, and I'm kind of bearing the lead here, is we actually like when folks read one of these books, we give them a $200 Amazon gift card. And what they do is like they read the book, they write up a little book report on it, and then they email it out to the entire organization, which then kind of like shows everybody like, oh wow, okay, there's that person who's like, wow, that's funny. There's that high performer who does one of these every month. Right.
I like that
And
a
so
lot.
that's
That's
the way we
great.
go about that.
I think it's very clever. And you made a point, which is an adjunct to what we normally talk about, but customer success, the thing that really disappoints me, and this was done very badly early days at Salesforce, is people hire people into CS that are technical experts in the configuration of your product.
Yep.
That's fine for professional services, but do you know what professional services and especially CS need? They need expertise in the jobs to be done with your product. Right.
Business.
So the best CSM possibly still in the world at Salesforce was a guy called Thomas Oskopowski, and we hired him from a customer. He's still there, like 18 years later, I think. And it's because he knew the job. He was the customer. And so we want that level of credibility and expertise in our CS teams. And it's really helpful pre-sales, is it not? When you say this is the person who'll be looking after you once we've sold it, and then they say something smart. Yeah,
exactly. Quick, say something smart to establish credibility. Oh, John McMahon. Did I get it? Did I get it right? ROI. So what are some of the other ways that you think about like instilling domain expertise? Because like obviously there's like what I just kind of talked about, which is like having an ongoing curriculum. There's obviously like curriculum during onboarding. That's tough because it's like in one ear and out the other. What are the other ways of like investing in people's domain expertise?
At the enterprise level of town, I was just talking to a guy the other day, he's an alumni of ours, who's over at Rockwell Automation. So they sell, $20 million deals, like big deals. If you're selling large enterprise, he was literally talking to me from a customer's office because that's part of their thing. They walk the halls. That's what I used to do. The most fun part of my job
was it called? You want to be badged.
100%. That's a high bar, but you want to be badged. And I used to go to steel mills, paper and pulp mill. That was my favorite, actually. Like literally go in there so we totally understood it. Now, can we do this in SaaS and high velocity? Absolutely not. We can't. So what's the alternative to that? What we could do, though, and I used to do this all the time running teams, was have a customer guest call in. And I'm very happy to do it.
We did that the other day. Yeah, please tell us.
Tell us all about it. Tell us about how you use our stuff. That's interesting. And of course, there's the obvious stuff, why you bought, what the value is, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. But you know what's best is, what are you thinking about at the moment? Like, forget what we do, but what's going on for you, and what are the things that impact that? So as you go in to meet other organizations, you've got context, you've got conversation, you've got credibility. Because people, there's an old adage, they talk about people like them. Shouldn't be like that, but it is, because it feels safe. It's like
pretty hard to buck a million years of like evolution in that regard,
100%. But it is what it is, and so we have to feel familiar to them by using their language and understanding their context.
Right.
And that's very hard if you job hop around, and sometimes it's forced because we early say. But if you're moving around and you keep changing domain or horizontal application, it's very hard for you to build up that muscle memory, as it were, in that context.
Yeah. That's a really good point, because we have, speaking of like very talented CSMs, we have a senior CSM here at Atrium, a gentleman named Carson, who he used to be an AE at Atrium, and he was our first AE, and he sold a lot of Atrium, and he's just very, very, very expert, not just at the product, but also just like the subject matter, right? So like data-driven sales management, like what good management looks like and what it doesn't look like, right? And so he knows, because he's interacted with like hundreds and hundreds of hundreds of ops, and like probably nearing 100 customers that he's sold, right? And then now as a CSM, and so I think persisting that and saying, hey, I want to take a break from like being account executive, I'm going to move into doing CS, is like a really great way of like building on top of that like the work that you've already done, I think that's an absolutely fantastic thing. And like the thing that kind of pops to mind that you see this as like sellers move around and like they stay around their kind of same buyer persona, because of course you've got your Rolodex, which is great, but also you have empathy for them. Probably the best example, I was talking with Max Altschuler the other day. So Max, founder of Sales Hacker, it was acquired by Outreach, and then of course he worked on marketing stuff at Outreach, and so now he's no longer at Outreach anymore, and he's a full-time investor. But specifically what he does, he's got GTM Fund, right?
Yep.
And GTM Fund is focused on, if you had to guess, GTM technologies. And it's just like a great example of just like stacking expertise on expertise there. And I was introducing him to a couple of what are known as LPs, like investors who invest in funds. And as I was writing up the email, I was just like, Matt, you couldn't get a better guy for this job, because like he and I are probably like the two folks I would think is like most plugged into the sales technology realm. And it was very easy for me to say that, because I'm just like, yeah, you can't argue with that. And it's because like Max hasn't been jumping around. He's been going like from strength to strength in this specific area. On the inviting customers in, I think one very tactical way of doing that is most organizations probably have some sort of cadenced all hands in some sort of capacity. We do ours monthly. So like a month will close, and then like the next week we'll have an all hands where we put together a deck, whatever. We actually invited in the SVP. So Gainsight is one of our customers, and the gentleman who runs the enterprise business there is a gentleman named Jim Murphy, who's absolutely fantastic. He's been Gainsight, much like Salesforce, is another organization that has like crazy culture and also extremely long tenures, like very, very impressive, to your point about like, don't walk on your expertise. And so Jim's been there for like 9 years. And yeah, we like put 15 minutes aside. He called in, like he was between customer meetings. He couldn't get on Zoom. So he was just like calling in from his phone, and like everyone loved it. Right. They just, and the account executive who'd been working with him kind of did like a very lightweight interview with him, had put together some slides, and people were just like absolutely stoked on it. It's a great way of just like cadencing it. So just kind of like our enablement thing we were talking about before, you can't do random acts. You want to systematize it. I would highly recommend, taking the opportunity to like layer in customer voice, even if it's done asynchronously, into your all hands rhythm.
Yeah, and there's no reason you can't record it for future, right? Put it in your onboarding sequencing, right? For sure. Yeah. I would agree.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, Matt, because you were kind of mentioning this earlier, was I think the SaaS explosion, has really led to a rise in like familiarity and comfort with like velocity, like commercial / mid-market sales motions. And I think that makes a ton of sense. And actually, I mean, Salesforce is like probably the best example of this. Like, it's funny, when I talk about Salesforce, I get in trouble about this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I oftentimes think that like one of Salesforce's like probably like biggest innovation probably wasn't a technology innovation, it was more a go-to-market innovation around being able to sell software from the cloud via inside sales. Like obviously there were outside sellers as well, but like the ability to sell 20K deals over the phone to organizations who previously like would not have been able to adopt CRM because like Siebel was too heavy and a pain in the ass. So that's rad. And that like Salesforce is like the granddaddy of all of our inside sales motions, where we're selling 15K, 20K, 25K, 40K deals. But eventually you grow up. And also the reason why that's important is because usually a lot of us are in the business of like selling weird new stuff, like new categories. If you got something that's new and weird, the enterprise is probably not going to be like super fast to adopt that. Whereas like mid-market organizations are like, yeah, I do have that problem. That sounds weird, but it's worth 25K. Like let's go ahead and like let's take a swing at this. But once you prove your category, and like we're dealing with this right now, where like Gainsight is a good example of a big customer of ours. Like I would have never tried to sell to Gainsight 3 years ago. It would have been like ridiculous. Like, get out of here, kid. But eventually you go up market, right? And so the sales motion that requires 2 people or 3 stakeholders to get you 25K is not going to be the sales motion that's going to land you a 250K deal, 100K deal, 150K deal, 250K deal, let alone your, $10 million EDS deals or what have you. When you think about organizations that are kind of like navigating this transition, it feels like how have you seen that be successful? Because it feels scary to just like, let's just grab some enterprise reps and pull them in here. Like they won't know anything about the existing sales motion or subject matter or what have you. How have you seen, folks do that successfully?
One of the things I like is to go and get that tenured enterprise rep as you bring them in and make them part of the collaboration to redesign the sales motion, because they're going to come in with a perspective on how you do that. They're not going to know your product and your current sales motion, which actually I think is a benefit because they've got fresh eyes on it.
Sure.
What I know to be true for the folks that are doing it for the first time, if you're going to go after really extended sales cycles, 9 months plus, you have to kind of make an investment and say that, we're going to have to pay some people some guaranteed income for a period of time, and start experimenting with our go-to-market motion. The big difference that I see, and we touched on earlier before the show, was in a mid-market motion, you go after your targets. You'll have your 3 or 4 or 5 people that are part of the process, and you go straight to them. Right? In an enterprise motion, you've got to figure out, honestly, in a real enterprise deal, when you're talking, $500,000 plus, you don't go sell $500,000 first time, usually. Depending on your thing, what you usually do is you go do a proof of concept of some description, because someone's risking their reputation and internal social capital on this. Right. So then the question becomes, how do I figure out with whom I should be engaging to do this? Who's the mobilizer within the organization who I should bet my thing on? Because here's something most people don't think about. You go and secure a $50,000 proof of concept, a pilot, and you think, victory, this is going to happen. And if it goes well, we're going to get the big deal. Maybe not, because so many organizations have innovation funds and skunkworks groups with 50 grand, nothing. That's one of 30 of these projects are doing. Hey, yeah, it was successful. Guess what? It's not a priority in the broader organization. So you're never going to get the $1 million or $500,000.
It was successful, but it was the 3rd most successful of the 5 that we were doing.
Exactly. And so I think that you bring someone in that's been there, done that. Don't try and figure it out for yourself. The mistake I see people doing is taking a really successful mid-market rep and promoting them to enterprise as though they know what to do. That happens all the time. I made that mistake. in Salesforce. I took the top mid-market rep and brought him into my group in the enterprise, failed miserably, left, went off to a competitor, came back 2 years and rejoined that corporate sales group. Nailed it, and is still there now. Is really good. All on me. That was my mistake, but that was 15 years ago. Hopefully, I've learned from my mistakes. And so that's how I think about it. And the other thing I would say is this: if you can, involve some of your customer contacts to help you think this through. Right. So you'll have some top end of your customer base. Some of them will be approaching enterprise or whatever else. Bring them in as basically a design partner. And do you know what? People love that.
Oh yeah.
Come and help us build our business. People love it. They, if they're a successful customer of yours, they'd love to help you and challenge some of the assumptions you have about how to get things done. And the other thing I would say is use your network. So something I've done in the past is grab my friends at large enterprise, Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson. In fact, the best advice I ever got was from the former CFO of J&J worldwide. And my only question to him was, how do I get in your office? How do I get a meeting with you? And he walked me through it. So somewhere in our families, our friends, we know people that work in these large enterprise. Get connected to someone who can step you through how it works. That's what I think.
I like that. Yeah. It's like,
you know what he said to me? Can I share with you what he said? He gave me one
I would love that.
So he said to me, I have to think that you know something that I need to know now.
Yeah, it can't be, I need to know this later. I need to know this.
Here's the problem. How do I know he needs to know it now? Background research, right? That's enterprise. I've got to go speak to the underlings and find out what the executive priorities are. Keep my powder dry until he needs to hear from me, because I don't want to misfire, right?
Yeah, I think I was having lunch with Kyle Porter from Sales Loft the other
Oh, yeah.
day, and we were talking about what he was calling talking progressive discovery, and we're essentially like what you can do, and you can't do this in a mid-market sale, like go to discovery, like use Atrium as an example, go to discovery with a couple of like AE managers,
Mhm.
collate that together, take that to the VP of sales, do that a couple of times, VP sales, VP sales, VP sales, bring that to the CRO. Now you know the entire organization, right? You know something that they need to know now. How, like, I would imagine you did that with EDS, right?
Mm. Oh yeah, I did it at Salesforce too because we were an enterprise group. So yeah, we did that with, and previous lives actually when I was selling SAP and PeopleSoft back in the day. If you remember PeopleSoft, so big ERP systems. 100% that's what you did. 100%. And then of course the story when you talk about getting champions and supporters, those supporters are feeding you the info you need to be successful in those executive meetings, right? And also the politics. Right, because when you got, and
Yes.
this is a thing that's changed for you and I, Pete. Back in the day, mid-market, we didn't have to worry about it because the stakeholder buying committee was pretty small. Now, you've
Now,
seen that it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and that introduces a whole new thing, which is politics. We've got to know who's
politics in a 25K deal?
it's a pain
What?
in the ass. You got to
I
know
know,
something
right?
about it. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, I
it's
think that's an important, and that ends up being something that kind of mid-market, more junior sellers need kind of coaching on, which is like, it's not just what is this person's problem and how do we solve it, but what do other people think about that person, and what does that person think about other people in the organization? Does this, so in our pre-call planning, thing, one of the things we talk about is like, hey, who's the person you're meeting with? What persona are they? Okay, that's like table stakes. How long have they been there?
right. What social
How
capital do they have?
how long have they been there? How junior are they? Right? Where do they, like, I'll give you an example, right? Like, in our sales motion, it's kind of two-legged. You have sales management, SDR management, sales leadership, and then in sales operations. And so, and sometimes, like, and there's different sub personas within sales operations. We have enlightened sales operations people who view their job as to like make AE managers or SDR managers more successful. And then we have less enlightened sales operations people who are like, I am the report keeper. I own the information. You have to come to me to get the information, right? And that person is a little less fun to sell to
They're often see more, right? I want to see more. I want to see more, and they're like,
yeah.
oh, never-ending sales cycle.
Sure, but so that, like, but you still got to deal with them, right? Two-legged sale, right? And so oftentimes what we'll say is like, hey, this sales operations person, like, how senior are they? Where were they before? Right? Are they a promoted SDR? And like, they're deputized, or maybe they were like, a sales operations person in their prior role, but like, man, they weren't there for like more than like 9 months in the role before that. Interesting. Okay, I'm getting a vibe here. In fact,
I also like to know what they've done in the past, right? And like, what projects have they stood up in their current organization? That's probably a good one for you, isn't it? Like, if they've had the ability to push something through, like they championed a new initiative, put in a new CRM or something, that's a pretty strong signal for you.
100%. But in the situation here, like when we're literally just like pre-call planning and thinking about like the politics, it's like, okay, this person may be hopefully this person is a friendly, and ideally I can make you even more of a friendly. But in the scenario where you're not a friendly, I'm going to get this perspective on you, and then maybe get that from the other people too. Hey, so I had a meeting with Matt Cameron the other day, and honestly, I thought it went pretty well, but it was a little guarded. I was kind of surprised because, like, I came. You ever run into anything like that? And then, of course, like, it all comes out of their mouth. We're just like, oh man, I can't get anything done with that person. And so, like, now we know. Now we have information on this, right? And so hopefully your sales cycles don't have to contend with that all that much. But thinking about like what other people think about this person, and like, it's one thing to be like, oh man, my champion's super champed up, they're going to be okay, great, I'm glad. What do other people think about that person, right?
Mhm.
And like, are they
Yeah.
actually going to be able to run through the finish line, or like, or do they just like talk a really big game? Hey, Elliot, are you here to kick us out?
I am, unfortunately. Yeah, so we're gonna wrap things up, guys. Do you want to start off by thanking everyone for attending? Always love having you guys here. Thank you to our wonderful sponsor, Atrium. Make sure to check them out. Link to their website is in the chat. Big thank you to Pete and Matt for the content. That was great. Recordings and takeaways will be available on our page shortly. Also, don't forget to check out our upcoming events, and we'll see you next time. Take care.